The fastest way to turn honest money into suspicious money is not to steal it. It is to act afraid of it. I want you to understand that sentence because most people miss the real danger completely. They hear one number, $10,000, and their brain does something small, frightened, and costly. They do not think like an owner. They think like a cornered animal. They think, I will just go under the line. I will make it look smaller. I will make myself look invisible. And that is how perfectly legal money walks into a trap. I have spent my life watching people misunderstand systems. They see the headline number and miss the mechanism underneath it. They see the posted speed limit and ignore the police officer watching the road. They see the tax bill and ignore the incentive structure that produced it. And when it comes to banks, cash, and federal reporting, ordinary people do something even worse. They assume the report is the danger. The report is not the danger, the panic is the danger. The instinct to break yourself into little pieces is the danger. The urge to look smaller than the truth is the danger. As of today, the rule itself is not complicated. Cash transactions over $10,000 trigger a currency transaction report. The bank files it, the report goes to FinCEN inside the Treasury Department. It is routine, it is automatic, it is not a letter accusing you of a crime, it is not an audit notice. It is not proof that anybody believes you did something wrong. It is paperwork. Federal law has required these reports for decades, and the current threshold is still $10,000. The law that matters even more is the one that prohibits structuring transactions to evade that reporting requirement. That part is where honest people ruin themselves. I want to give this mechanism a name because if you cannot name a trap, you usually end up living inside it. I call it the threshold trap. The threshold trap is simple. The government has one system for large cash transactions. Your bank has another system for suspicious patterns. Most people only learn the first system. Then they react in a way that activates the second. That is the whole disaster. One system says, if a cash transaction is over $10,000, a report gets filed. The other system says, if your behavior looks like you are trying to dodge that report, the bank may decide your behavior itself is suspicious. And the cruel part is that the second system often activates because a good law-abiding person thought he was being clever. That is why the danger here is psychological before it is legal. The legal rule is plain enough. The psychological rule is what destroys people. Human beings hate being watched. They hate the idea of being recorded. They hate government forms they never asked for. So the moment they hear $10,000, they do not respond with clarity. They respond with shrinkage. They become small. They become evasive. They become theatrical. They become the very pattern the machine is designed to notice. I have seen this in investing. I have seen it in business. I have seen it in taxes, and I have seen it in banking. Whenever people think the line itself is the threat, they start doing line management instead of truth. Management, they stop asking what actually happened and start asking, how do I make this look like less than it is? That question is poison. If you remember nothing else from me, remember this: do not manage around the report. Manage around the truth. The truth is your shield. The pattern is what can hang you. You may not like that system. You may believe the threshold should have been indexed long ago. You may believe the ordinary saver should not have to think about FinCEN in the first place. None of that changes the fact that the trap is real. The market does not care what price you wish a stock had. Gravity does not care what height you wish the cliff had. And this system does not care that you are a retiree, a widow, a parent, or a person who has never broken a law in your life. The machine only sees movement. That is the part retirees and savers need to understand. Institutions do not feel your life. They do not feel your grief. They do not feel your innocence. They do not feel your explanation before you make it. They see a pattern. They see dates. They see amounts. They see repeated deposits below a threshold. They see a customer acting like somebody who wants to stay under a bright line. You may know you are innocent. The machine does not know innocence. The machine knows pattern. That is why I tell people to stop thinking like defendants and start thinking like owners. An owner deposits the money, honestly. An owner keeps records. An owner answers briefly. An owner does not perform fear at the teller window. An owner does not scatter his own money across days and branches because his neighbor gave him bad advice over coffee. Poor behavior usually begins with a poverty instinct. When people feel small around institutions, they start making themselves smaller. They split the deposit. They drive to another branch. They ask the teller whether they can keep it under the limit. They whisper. They improvise. They turn one clean transaction into a suspicious sequence. That is what I call the evasion reflex. The evasion reflex is expensive because it gives you all the emotional relief of feeling clever and none of the actual safety. In fact, it often gives you the opposite of safety. A clean $14,000 cash deposit from selling your car is ordinary a $7,000 deposit now and another one later because you wanted to stay below the line is the kind of pattern that can create trouble you never needed. If you sold a car for cash, you did not do something dirty. Do not deposit the money like a dirty man. That is the principle. And once you understand the principle, almost every real-life situation becomes clear. Suppose you sell your car privately for $14,000. The buyer pays you in cash. That is legal. That is normal. The amateur move is to think, I will do $7,000 today and the rest next week. The owner move is to walk in, deposit the full amount, and bring the paperwork that explains the source. A bill of sale, names, date, amount, signatures. That is not overkill. That is discipline. Discipline is what keeps lawful money looking lawful. The same thing happens with family gifts. A son or daughter gives a parent $15,000 to help with medical bills. A roof repair, or simply because the child is doing well and wants to give back. Most people immediately ask the wrong question. They ask, how do we keep it under the radar? The right question is, what is the cleanest way to document the truth? Under federal tax rules, gifts are generally not taxable income to the recipient, and the annual gift, tax exclusion is $19,000 per recipient for both 2025 and 2026. Even above that amount, the reporting issue generally falls on the giver, not the recipient. But notice how quickly ordinary people lose the plot. The money is a gift. The tax treatment is one issue. The banking behavior is a separate issue. The banking trap begins when somebody says, just put $5,000 in one branch, $5,000 in another, and $5,000 after the weekend. That is not smart. That is the threshold trap speaking through a family member. If your child gives you a lawful gift, deposit the lawful gift as a lawful gift. Get a simple note if you want extra support name date. Amount statement that it is a gift with no expectation of repayment. You are not trying to win an award for drama. You are trying to make the truth easy to recognize. The truth should be boring. Boring is your friend. Most financial disasters begin when people try to be interesting. Now let me take you to the case that bothers me the most because it exposes the cruelty of the machine. A widow consolidates her own savings after her husband dies. The money is hers, the source is plain, the purpose is ordinary, but she is grieving, overwhelmed, and afraid of moving a big number at once. So she moves it in pieces, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. Over several weeks, from one set of hands to the same set of hands, her life story says innocent, her pattern says evasive, and the machine reads pattern. That is the sort of moment where good people learn the wrong lesson too late. They discover that the system was never reading their intentions the way a friend would. It was reading their behavior the way a compliance engine does. Not because a banker hates them, not because some agent woke up hoping to torment a retired teacher, because the system is built to notice fragmentation when fragmentation appears designed. You need to let that sink in. Your life can be heartbreaking and lawful at the same time. But if your behavior looks engineered to evade a rule, the heartbreak does not remove the pattern. That is why I keep saying the same thing in different language. Full truth beats nervous cleverness. One clean move beats 6 anxious moves. Documentation beats explanation. Records beat memory. Simplicity beats improvisation. The same rule applies to inheritances. People hear estate tax and panic. They hear inheritance and assume everything is radioactive. The reality is much narrower than the fear. For federal income tax purposes, inheritances are generally not taxable to the recipient, though later earnings or gains on inherited assets can be another matter. The estate tax hits only very large estates, not the ordinary family scenario most people imagine. But once again, the tax treatment is not what ruins people here. The behavior ruins them. A brother dies. An executor distributes funds. Cash comes from a safe deposit box or a household safe. And instead of making one clean deposit with estate paperwork attached, somebody starts feeding the money into the bank in pieces because they think the threshold itself is the predator. Remember, the threshold is the signpost. The trap is your reaction. I want you to separate those in your mind. The signpost tells you where the rule is. The trap is the moment you decide to dance around the signpost instead of walking straight through with the truth in your hand. That difference is everything. Social Security can trip the same instinct. A retiree delays benefits, then receives a lump, some catch-up payment. The number is larger than expected. Fear lights up. The retiree starts moving money around because the deposit looks too big. But government payments already come with a record trail. The deposit itself is not the mystery. The only mystery appears when you begin creating movement that had no good reason to exist. Again, the trap is not the number. The trap is the choreography. That is how I want you to think about this entire subject. Stop staring at the number as though the number has magical powers. It does not. 10,000 is a reporting threshold, not a curse. It is not a prosecutor. It is not a prison sentence. It is a trigger for paperwork. What creates real danger is when you convert an ordinary truthful event into a pattern that appears designed to evade that paperwork. And that conversion almost always happens because people are ashamed of being noticed. That shame is irrational, but it is powerful. Small savers have spent their lives in institutions built by larger players. They already feel one step behind. They already suspect the rules were not written for them. So when they hear that a report gets filed, they do not feel routine. They feel exposed. And exposure creates theater. Theater creates pattern. Pattern creates suspicion. You must not let your fear become evidence against your behavior. This is not just a banking lesson. It is a life lesson. Every system punishes the person who lies to the system, and often punishes the person who acts like he is lying, even when he is not. If you run a business and your books are sloppy, you invite the wrong questions. If you invest with no written rules, you become prey to every headline. If you move money with no records and no discipline, you convert ownership into anxiety. That is why the people who sleep well are not the people who know the most jargon. They are the people whose records are clean. I call this the paper shield. The paper shield is not glamorous. It will not make you feel like a genius. It will not impress your brother-in-law at dinner. It will not give you the dopamine rush of feeling one step ahead of the system. What it gives you is something much rarer. It gives you dignity. It lets you behave like a lawful adult with lawful money. And dignity is worth more than cleverness in almost every serious part of life. Here is what the paper shield looks like in practice. You create a folder. Physical or digital. I do not care. You label it something simple. Transaction records, deposit support, source documents. Then every time you handle a meaningful cash deposit or transfer, you preserve 4 things. First, a one-sentence note about where the money came from. Second, the supporting document if one exists. Bill of sale, gift note, estate settlement document, award letter, transfer record. Third, the bank statement showing the deposit. Fourth, the transfer confirmation. If you move money between accounts, that is it. You are not writing a novel. You are not preparing for a courtroom drama. You are creating a trail that makes the truth easy. Most people do the opposite. They keep nothing while everything is normal, and then try to reconstruct their life when somebody asks a question 3 years later. Memory is a terrible filing system. Panic is even worse. Paper beats memory because paper does not get tired, emotional, defensive, or forgetful. When I buy a business, I do not fall in love with the founder's storytelling. I look for records. I look for the economics. I look for the trail. The same principle applies here. The truth becomes more believable when it has a body. Paper gives truth a body. Now let me tell you where people make their second big mistake. The first mistake is trying to avoid the report. The second mistake is trying to over-explain themselves when asked an ordinary question. A teller asks where the money came from. That is normal. A compliance employee asks what the transfer was for. That can be normal. Your job is not to perform innocence. Your job is to answer honestly and briefly. I sold my car. It was a gift from my daughter. I am consolidating my accounts. It came from the estate distribution. That is usually enough, especially if your paperwork is clean. You do not need to narrate your entire life. You do not need to sound nervous. And under no circumstances should you say something foolish like, "I just did not want to trigger a report." Those are the words of a person thinking inside the threshold trap. Once you understand the trap, you stop talking like that because you stop thinking like that. There is another uncomfortable truth here. The suspicious activity side of the system is opaque by design. A suspicious activity report does not require the same bright line threshold as a CTR banks file SARs based on suspicious behavior. And the institution generally cannot tell you that one has been filed. That is one reason the evasion reflex is so costly. People think they are avoiding visibility. In reality, they may be creating the exact kind of visibility they were afraid of, and in a form they cannot see. This is what happens when people manage appearance instead of substance. They lose control twice. First, they lose control of their behavior. Then they lose control of the story the system tells about that behavior. I do not want that for you. I especially do not want that for retirees, widows, savers, and ordinary families who have spent decades doing the slow, honorable work of building a little security. You should not let one frightened decision turn a lifetime of discipline into months of legal stress. That is why I reject the smallness mindset so strongly. Smallness tells you to duck. Ownership tells you to document. Smallness tells you to sneak. Ownership tells you to state the truth. Smallness tells you to break the deposit. Ownership tells you to deposit it cleanly and keep the record. I want to go one layer deeper because this is where money and psychology always meet. People do not usually structure because they are evil. They structure because they hate uncertainty. They think if they keep the transaction below a line, they preserve control. But that is false control. It is the same kind of false control people feel when they trade in and out of markets, because headlines scare them. They are not reducing danger, they are reducing discomfort. And the bill for reducing discomfort often arrives later with interest. Never confuse emotional relief with strategic safety. That is one of the most expensive mistakes in finance. It is true in markets, it is true in taxes, and it is true in cash handling. The lawful, boring, adult move often feels worse in the moment because it forces you to walk straight through the thing you fear. One full deposit, one clear explanation, one clean paper trail, no shrinking, no choreography, no pretend invisibility that feels emotionally harder. It is strategically easier, and the emotionally easier move, breaking things apart, usually becomes strategically harder if you want a clear dividing line between amateurs and professionals. Here it is. Amateurs optimize for the feeling of not being watched. Professionals optimize for the ability to withstand scrutiny if watched. That difference changes everything. Professionals leave evidence. Amateurs avoid it. Professionals assume questions may come later and prepare accordingly. Amateurs pray that no questions come. Professionals know that clean records create optionality. Amateurs spend all their energy trying to avoid the room where records matter. I want you on the professional side of that line, whether you have $10,000 or $10 million. Now let me deal with another kind of confusion, because confusion is where bad advice multiplies. A lot of people mix together three separate ideas that should be kept apart. The first idea is taxability. The second is reporting. The third is suspicious pattern detection. Those are not the same thing. A gift can be non-taxable to the recipient and still be handled badly at the bank. An inheritance can be generally non-taxable to the recipient for federal income. Tax purposes and still become a headache if deposited in a suspicious pattern. Your own savings can be 100% lawful and still create trouble if you move them around like a guilty man. And a routine Kantar can be filed even though nothing is wrong at all. If you do not separate those ideas, you end up reacting to the wrong problem. You think you are solving taxes when you are actually creating a pattern issue. You think you are avoiding scrutiny when you are actually inviting a different kind. You think the big number is dangerous when the dangerous thing is your behavior around the big number. Clarity is a financial asset. Confusion is a tax. The people who pay the heaviest confusion tax are usually the ones who rely on advice from people with no skin. In the consequences, the neighbor, the cousin, the guy at the diner, the online comment that says, just keep it under 10 grand and you will be fine. I have never known ignorance to become smarter because it was spoken confidently. If somebody gives you advice that sounds like sneaking, treat it as poison. There is a larger moral lesson in all of this. The system often treats honest people more harshly when they start behaving like frightened people. Fear can make innocents look guilty. That is not fair, but it is real. If you are going to handle money in a system like that, your first duty is to not let fear write your behavior. That may sound harsh, but it is actually empowering. It means the biggest part of the solution sits in your hands. You do not control FinCEN. You do not control federal law. You do not control bank software, but you do control whether you will break a clean event into a dirty pattern. You do control whether you will keep records. You do control whether you will answer simply. You do control whether you will behave like the owner of lawful money or like a man trying to sneak his own life through a side door. I know which one I would choose, and I know which one most people postpone because they do not like the feeling of being visible. Visibility is not the enemy. Vagueness is the enemy. If your money is lawful, your goal is not invisibility. Your goal is coherence. Coherence means the amount makes sense, the source makes sense, the timing makes sense, the documents make sense, your explanation makes sense, and your behavior matches the explanation. That is what institutions trust when they trust anything at all. Not charm, not panic, not a long emotional speech. Coherence. I want to give you a brutal sentence now because sometimes a brutal sentence does more good than a soft one. If you are too timid to deposit your own lawful money honestly, you are not protecting yourself. You are volunteering to be misunderstood. That is what structuring behavior often is at the emotional level. It is a timid person volunteering to be misunderstood by a machine. Do not volunteer, deposit the money, keep the record, tell the truth, and move on with your life. There is also a point where prudence becomes self-sabotage. Prudence is keeping a bill of sale. Prudence is saving statements. Prudence is consolidating accounts in one clean transfer. Prudence is asking a qualified professional when you truly have a legal or tax question. Self-sabotage is trying to outguess a reporting system with improvised little maneuvers. The first builds safety, the second builds pattern, and pattern is what you must fear more than paper. If federal agents or prosecutors ever contact you directly about your banking activity, that is the moment to stop improvising entirely. You do not explain your way out with a shaky voice and a good heart. You get competent legal counsel before you start filling the air with words. Honest people love to talk when they are scared. That is another trap. A frightened innocent person can create a very messy record in the name of clearing things up. Do not do that. There is a time for documentation, there is a time for counsel, and there is a time to stop talking that is not paranoia, that is discipline. But notice how even here the same principle survives. The answer is not cleverness. The answer is structure. Good records, good counsel, good timing. The adult answer is almost always structural. The childish answer is almost always emotional. That is why wealth and dignity go together more often than people admit. Wealth at its best is not consumption. It is structure. It is the ability to live in systems without panicking every time a number appears. It is the ability to maintain calm records and options. It is the ability to keep your own behavior from becoming your enemy. You may think this subject is small because it revolves around one threshold and a few bank forms. It is not small. It is a perfect test of whether you think like prey or like an owner prey flinches at the line. Owners walk through it with records. Prey breaks itself into pieces. Owners stay whole. Prey improvises. Owners prepare. Prey tries to avoid paperwork. Owners use paperwork as armor. That is the choice. Not 10,000 versus 9,000. Not one branch versus 3 branches. Not this day versus next week. The real choice is whether you will live inside the threshold trap or outside it, outside the trap. The rule is plain. Large cash transaction, deposit it cleanly. Let the routine report happen if it happens. Keep your documents, answer honestly. Do not perform fear. Do not design patterns that look like evasion. Do not let gossip outrank law. Do not let panic outrank paper. Inside the trap, every move gets smaller and dumber. You split the cash. You recruit relatives. You spread the deposits. You ask the teller questions you should never ask. You start hiding from a routine report and end up creating the very kind of suspicious pattern that can bring real pain into your life. Most financial pain works like that. It begins with a lie told to yourself. I am not really hiding. I am just being careful. You are not being careful if you are behaving in a way specifically designed to avoid a reporting rule. You are being fragile. And fragility is expensive. I want to close where the whole matter really lives, which is not in the statute book but in your nervous system. When you next hold a large sum of lawful cash from a car sale, a gift, an inheritance, a delayed benefit payment, or a transfer of your own savings, you will feel the old instinct rise in your chest. Stay under the line. Make it smaller. Delay it, split it, disappear. That is the threshold trap speaking. When you hear that voice, I want another voice to answer it. I have nothing to hide. I will not behave like I do. I will use the paper shield. I will keep the truth simple. I will not turn lawful money into suspicious choreography. That is the voice of an owner. And here is the final test. When your lawful money reaches the threshold, will you shrink yourself to fit under a number, or will you stand at full height, deposit it cleanly? Keep your records and act like the money belongs to an honest adult, because that moment is bigger than one bank rule. That moment tells me whether you are still living like a frightened worker inside somebody else's system, or whether you have finally learned to move through the system like the owner of your own life.